Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. And today we're going to have a very lively discussion. Apparently, in the great Washington, D.C., The Apprentice has come to town and people are getting fired and they're getting laid off. So we're going to discuss DOGE, the layoffs that are occurring, and the potential savings that are taking place in Washington, D.C. Now, recently, David was on PBS discussing this, and finally, he's going to be on CBS Today discussing it. So we're going to bring in the former Comptroller General of the United States, the Honorable David M. Walker. David, DOGE is up, and your day in the sun is about to shine because finally people are recognizing we have a serious spending problem in Washington, D.C., and billions, maybe trillions of dollars being thrown away.
No question, Nick. And, I've long advocated for a comprehensive review and reassessment of the organization and operations of government. What does it do? How does it do it? Who does it? How do you measure success? And how are we doing, as compared to others? While DOGE's actual mission is much narrower, I think we need to keep in mind what DOGE is and what it isn't. It's not conducting an audit. It is conducting transaction reviews of a number of federal information systems using technologies that, quite frankly, did not exist until recently. The application of artificial intelligence into these systems, and then they're identifying questionable transactions that, in their view, represent fraud, waste, abuse, or mismanagement. And DOGE is unprecedented in two ways. One, they're using those tools that weren't available until recently. And secondly, they have unprecedented direct access to the President of the United States, whereas if they see something, they can go directly to the President. The President can make a decision, and he can say, terminate this contract, eliminate this unit, lay off, certain types of people, if you will. And that's never existed before. It didn't exist in the first Trump administration. It hasn't existed in any administration today. At the same point in time, there's some, exaggerations that are occurring right now. DOGE in many cases is claiming that they've saved a lot of money. The truth is only Congress can cut spending. They can make recommendations to cut spending for various contracts they deem to be inappropriate or whatever. But they can't, the president can't cut spending. Only Congress can cut spending, and the president has to end up submitting, a request to the Congress, which the Congress would have to act on in order for that to happen. The one exception to that is reductions in force. And I think one of the reasons that DOGE and the administration are now being much more aggressive on reductions in force is, the Congress provides a limit as to how many people you can have. But it's not a floor. You could have less than that, but it is a ceiling. Whereas with regard to contracts and grants and things of that nature, it's not just a floor. It's not just a ceiling. It's also a floor, and they have to approve if you're not going to spend the money, if you will. So as a result, I think one of the reasons that they're trying to do more reductions in force now is because they might be able to achieve some savings that way. My personal view, DOGE is much needed and long overdue, but I'm very concerned about how they're going about doing their work. Some of these actions seem to be arbitrary. They're claiming that things are fraud when there's no evidence that it's fraud. Their opposition is claiming that what they're doing is illegal or unconstitutional without providing any evidence to that effect. And the last thing I would say is DOGE is just step one of what needs to be a multi-step process to put our finances in order. The really big changes on the organization and operations of government, the really big reductions in spending are going to require congressional action. They're going to require legislation. And given how narrow the margins are in Congress right now, it means you're going to have bipartisan support. And my concern is that public opinion about government is already at or near all-time low. And I think that what's going on right now is going to bring it lower. And the divide in Congress is very great. And I don't think that the way that things are being done are conducive towards trying to get bipartisan support, which was what will be necessary for the big type of reorganization and spending reductions that we need to make. Because we are spending $5.5 billion a day more than we're taking in. So, 100 million here, 100 million there, maybe soon it adds up to real money. But when you're spending 5.5 billion a day more than you're taking in, we got to do a lot more heavy lifting than what's being talked about right now. So that's kind of an intro, Nick.
Yeah, well, before we bring our panel in, I have a concern as I'm trying to predict the future. First of all, on this network, I said that two things were going to happen when Trump gets elected. Number one, he's going to play with tariffs because he doesn't have to touch Congress to do tariffs. So lo and behold, here comes tariffs. Number two, I predicted he's going to use executive orders like crazy. He did that also as well. But now here's my third prediction. They're going to attempt to cut taxes. So all this savings and all this hoopla is going to be for vain, because if you cut taxes, guess what? The deficit and the debt will still increase. So somewhere along the line, we're going to see if this party can actually hold the line and make sure they have revenue as well as cutting expenses, so you don't have that. But we haven't got to the expense ledger yet because, like you said, the Congress has to approve it, and they haven't done it. But boy, it's keeping it live in Washington, D.C., and certainly has been very good for our network as our ratings are up tremendously around the country and around the world, because you can't get a better show than The Apprentice out of Washington, D.C. And with that, we're going to bring in David Kinder, who's a financial advocate who likes tax-exempt investing, and see what he has to say about DOGE. And I'm sure they've gotten that out in California because, of course, you're in the state that has a nice, big, beautiful state income tax as well as a federal.
Oh, yeah.
So how does it affect
so the fun part is I have to report, I'm saddened to report that I too lost my job as a result of DOGE. I was responsible for a canine commission answering the age-old question, who let the dogs out? And like the Tootsie Roll Commission, the world may never know. So I had to start with that, but DOGE has boldened some people here in California, up in San Francisco Sheriff's Department. I think they had a couple of people masquerading as DOGE, trying to say, turn over all your records. They were imposters. They were either they quickly fled or they were arrested. I don't remember the result of that. DOGE it's really interesting. It is reality TV at a whole nother precedented level. The main thing I'm wondering is the accuracy of some of these calculators. I'm on the U.S. Debt Clock site, and now there is a DOGE calculator on there, and it's been going up ever since it showed up about 3 weeks ago. Now it's showing $105 billion, and of course it's going up.
It's totally bogus. It's totally bogus. There's no way, even if everything they found was adopted by the Congress, that it would come anywhere close to that number.
And I was always concerned about that. I was wondering, where did that number come from? Where is it being fed from? So I appreciate the facts there. And, I get most of my news, quite frankly, I get it from TikTok, and I start questioning everything. And the latest thing that I saw was comparing DOGE to Clinton's RICO. And I don't know nearly enough about that. So I'd be curious as to know to compare and contrast that.
Well, President Clinton tapped Vice President Gore to run the reinventing government effort. And that reinventing government effort did result in a significant reduction in force in the federal government. I think around 400,000 people. And it was part of the effort to try to take steps in the aftermath of winning the Cold War and recognizing that we were having additional challenges with regard to our finances. And so, that was probably something similar to what you would see now, because obviously the vice president was heading it, and the vice president had access to the president, but it tended to do its work and wait until the end before it ended up seeking permission from the president to make certain decisions. Okay, in this situation, what you have is the DOGE team working actually in the old executive office building, which is part of the White House complex, okay? And you have a situation where when they find something, they're immediately bringing it to the attention of the president or his advisors and getting decisions and then implementing those decisions. So that is fundamentally different from anything that's ever happened before. And as I said, they're using technologies and techniques that, quite frankly, haven't even been available until recent years, in particular the application of AI.
Yeah, David, I know you're going to be speaking in CBS very shortly, but I think one thing that you brought out that's pretty important that people do need to realize right now, that the largest expense by Congress is interest on the national debt. I mean, that to me is a big one because you don't get anything for it. And like I said, recognizing the problem is halfway there to solving the problem. And this is a big problem. And when interest rates are higher, the interest rates on the national debt are higher. And again, we're collecting taxes, paying interest on it, and frankly, getting nothing for it. So cutting expenses is something that frankly they have to do. But I agree with you, at least from a legal standpoint, the executive branch doesn't have the right to come in and just chop, chop, chop. They have to get approval by Congress because they're the ones that hold the purse string. I don't know when that's going to take place or if that's going to take place. I believe you're going to see this end up in the courts somewhere because, but anyway, yes, David.
Well, interest is the second largest line item in the federal budget. The first largest line item is Social Security, but interest is past defense, it's past Medicare, and if we don't end up changing course, it'll eventually pass Social Security. Presumably what they'll try to do, Nick, is they'll try to put something in the budget reconciliation package, potentially a number of requests for impoundment or rescission, if you will, of spending. As I said, I think one of the reasons that they're spending a lot more time looking at reductions in force, involuntary reductions in force, is because that way, if they don't end up using all of their allocated slots, they actually can save some money this year and next year. The problem is that how are you going about deciding who you're laying off? Because they're doing it, for example, all the new people, the people that are that don't have the same rights, or they're doing certain units. They're not doing it based upon any strategic effort. They're not doing it based upon performance. And so we'll have to see what the longer term implications are.
Yeah. Kim.
I think that they're not even doing it based on merit. But one of the things I learned years ago about layoffs, because I attended some course studies on this, and I actually helped mentor people who got hit by layoffs, because not everybody who's hit by a layoff deserved to be laid off. But is the economic impact that it has on the revenue flow in the economy, in the community, and in the country. When you start laying off at this volume, you have to consider what's the butterfly effect? What's the ripple effect? How many jobs will that impact moving around when you lay off at this volume? And it's huge. I mean, you're looking at least 10 jobs per person you lay off are impacted, because that person is not going to be generating a revenue flow in the economy. And those 10 jobs are going to impact another 10 per each. So the ripple effect can be very damaging if you are not careful with how you manage this. And where are these people to go work? In many cases, when they know that they're going to have a huge mass layoff, when people are honest and upfront and not using it to adjust their IPLs like Nortel used to do, you would have some planning done, and the economy could handle such an impact. But where are these people supposed to go work, David?
Well, it depends. I mean, the first program that was offered was the voluntary program, the so-called Fork in the Road program. And about 75,000 people took advantage of that. I would imagine that a vast majority of those people were probably people who were eligible to retire, and or people who had very marketable skills and decided that they wanted to look for another opportunity, if you will. That won't save any money, though, because the deal that they got was that they would get paid through the year, and they get all their benefits through the end of the year. It could save money next year, but it won't save money this year. But now, when you're talking about involuntary reductions in force, you're talking about some people who may not have marketable skills. Okay. And you're talking about, some people who may have a lot more difficulty in being able to find a job and are not eligible for retirement. And you need to keep in mind, where are these people located? Because it could have a disproportionate impact on certain cities or areas of the country. Most federal workers are outside of Washington, D.C., contrary to, popular belief. At the same point in time, to the extent that they're headquarters people, most headquarters people are in the Washington, D.C. area. So not only could it affect the economy, it also could affect things like housing prices. It could fundamentally change the supply and demand, equation for housing prices in the Washington, D.C. area, as an example.
Well, I see this being an economic disaster, kind of like when High Point had to close down their factories. It became probably one of the worst places in the country to live. All the homes were closed up and boarded up, and people had to leave the town, and it was just left in a mess. A lot of drug users, a lot of crime. So I don't see this. And then, you hit the nail on the head. A lot of the people who took the voluntary, they can get a job somewhere else because their skill sets are good. So now you got rid of a lot of good skill set people. And when you give a voluntary like this, a lot of people see it as there's no other way out. So I'd rather get paid for 7 months looking for a job than, risking it and being fired in 3 months, which does happen. And I'm just trying to give some people heads up out there that if you don't take it, you could very well lose it in 3 months and not have a backup plan, not have money being paid. And I don't think that there's going to be lawsuits allowed because of the way that they're allowing a voluntary layoff. So, but you hit the nail on the head. You're going to lose your best skill sets.
Well, there are going to be lawsuits, and there already have been lawsuits. But we'll have to see how they play out. In America, anybody can sue anybody about anything. But on day one of the creation of DOGE, several unions sued regarding DOGE, and that case has already been dismissed by a federal district court judge in Boston, saying that the unions lack standing, meaning that the unions were not directly affected by any reductions in force. They're indirectly affected because, as you know, the most heavily unionized workforce in the country is the government. And therefore, to the extent that a lot of, unionized workers in government are laid off, either voluntarily or involuntarily, they end up losing dues. But that's an indirect effect, not a direct effect. And so we'll have to see how these things play out.
Yeah. The other problem that they have, and of course, it's a case-by-case basis, there may be wrongful termination suits.
Correct.
It depends on the contracts that they have more than anything, because some of them have contracts, and generally the contracts will provide notice. Before you lay people off, you have to give them a notice. You just can't walk in and fire them. This isn't a private entity, and there's contracts. And then another thing is they have an opportunity to be heard. I don't think that the notice and opportunity to be heard is being done, but with this many layoffs, we don't know. So the wrongful termination suits and the notice of opportunity to be heard suit, if you're losing your job and you're an employment attorney in Washington, D.C., or plaintiff's attorney, you're probably going to be gainfully employed very shortly on the wrongful termination suits. But I think you're going to find that to be a very interesting part of this whole DOGE package.
And let me mention something that directly relates to that, and then we can start going around. Nick, you can pick people. But one of the things that President Trump did was he fired 17 inspectors general in the first few days of his presidency. And he did it without providing the 30-day notice to the Congress and without providing cause. And that's illegal. Okay. All he had to do was give the 30-day notice and provide cause, and it would have been legal. May or may not have been appropriate, but it would have been legal. And now you have 8 of those 17 inspectors general who are suing, because, they weren't provided, Congress wasn't provide that notice. But on the other hand, so far, Congress is sitting on their keister and doing nothing about it. And they've gotten pretty good at that. They've gotten pretty good at sitting on their keister and doing nothing.
Yeah, they've been doing it for years, so they're good at that. Yeah, Mark, you're up.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I was curious as to what David's thoughts are about DOGE having access to our taxpayer records and all along those lines, because that's been the other things that folks have been wondering about, this notion that they might have access to your IRS records and other things like that. So I just wondering your take on that. And then I was going to tease David just really quickly on a lighthearted note and everything, because he did say that he had lost his job in the dog catching world. So I'm thinking that maybe he went to Cleveland and had that incident of who let the dogs out and all along those lines, because that is definitely something that folks that are into sports, we know that reference and all along those lines. So I had to tease you about that.
Well, what, David, you want to answer the question about who let the dogs out?
We did not finish that commission, so no, I can't answer that one. However, I will sort of in the same vein, the people who are protesting so much on the news about DOGE and its impact is really quite telling to me. But you can kind of tell that I have a bias as to how I'm interpreting all of that. So when I'm seeing, certain Congress people, Maxine Waters, complaining about some of the stuff, like, really, the louder you protest, the more I think you're hiding something and you're afraid we're going to find out. And even though someone commented in the comments that DOGE is all pretty much a Twitter feed, I get it. And I can't, DOGE.gov, that's that website. All it is a Twitter feed of all the different things that channel is posting. Don't know what to make of it all. But it is interesting. Whoever is complaining the loudest, they're the ones I'd be the most suspicious of, which in a way I think is doing exactly what this commission is doing. It's rooting out who I think has the most conflicts of interest as opposed for this commission.
Well, first, it's not a commission. It is actually an office within the White House complex, which means that it's not subject to the Federal Advisory Committee Act. It means that there are limitations on the ability to get information from it through FOIA, but they're not exempt from GAO audits. And in fact, I know for a fact that the Congress has already asked GAO to do some audits on what DOGE is doing. And I expect that there could be some conflicts there. The GAO also has a role with regard to impoundments, that if the president asks for an impoundment, which is a rescission of funding, the GAO is supposed to provide its views of the potential implication to the Congress within a certain number of days. And if the executive branch tries to not spend money that's been appropriated and doesn't advise Congress, then the GAO has the responsibility to advise the administration of that, advise the Congress of that, and potentially sue if the administration doesn't rectify the situation. With regard to systems, you need to understand that, DOGE, they're employees. They're either special government employees of the federal government, or they're full-time employees of the federal government, facts and circumstances. And some of the DOGE people have already been embedded into line positions in government. For example, the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Fiscal Policy, which is responsible, among other things, for payments, resigned, and a DOGE person was put into that position on an acting basis, because that position is typically one that you have to get Senate confirmation. And, they're still working on cabinet positions, much less sub-cabinet level positions, if you will. So, I will say this. The opposition is making claims that what DOGE is doing is illegal or unconstitutional. Those are largely without merit, okay, those claims. At the same point in time, DOGE is making claims that a lot of what they're finding is fraud and corruption. They haven't provided adequate support for that either. Most of what they're finding so far represents waste, abuse, and mismanagement based upon either A, differences in position of policy between the Biden and Trump administration, or the fact that people did things during the Trump administration that the president, through executive order, has said he did not want done. But keep in mind this: executive order is not law. All an executive order is policy. It basically states the president's policy. So, you can't have a policy that's contrary to the law, nor can you have a policy that's contrary to the Constitution, which is the ultimate law, obviously. And so, a lot of these things are going to play out in the courts, and some of these things are going to play out in the Supreme Court.
Right. Yep, we're going to see it. Yeah, Jatovi, you're muted, so unmute yourself.
So just a few things. I'm glad you said at the end about what DOGE has found, but DOGE isn't finding waste. DOGE is finding policy differences. So that's exactly what we should be calling it, because saying I don't want to spend here waste is not true. It's just I don't want to spend there. I want to spend here. So it hasn't found any fraud, hasn't found waste. It's just found policy disputes. And then in terms of DOGE has already been hacked. So that's a problem. But I want to get back to the oversight, because there is no oversight. As much as we want to say GAO, you pointed out already that the Congress is sitting on their hands. As DOGE is going through and doing these things, such as firing the individuals who control our nuclear stuff, Congress has sat on their hands. Now they can't find the people to come back and deal with our nuclear stuff. Firing individuals dealing with Parks and Rec. Well, our parks are now being left alone because we're firing individuals that cover the actual fires that go through. So you have different things that they're haphazardly doing. And now it's actually hitting even the education department, because you have individual areas that are now shutting down special needs programs and all this other stuff, because DOGE is saying, hey, this $900 million suggestion that we're going to cut out of the Department of Education. Well, what are you cutting? No, they're just taking a mallet and just chopping up everything, and then figuring out, okay, it's the whole slogan that they're trying to live by, the move fast break. That doesn't work in government. That doesn't work in our society. That may work in a business that deals, especially in the tech industry, because I know how the tech industry works. But that does not work in the way government works, or a nonprofit industry, because that is what actually the government runs like, is more of a nonprofit, more so than a for-profit industry. So I guess my question to you, Dave, how do we create the need for oversight, because the oversight is not there at this moment? And we can all agree that it's not there, even though we say the GAO can do this, they're not going to.
Yeah,
how do we create the need?
Yeah,
Dave, I mean,
David,
we have a disagreement on that, but I just want to
let me explain to you. Let me explain to you why I say that. Okay, and I know for a fact. Okay, the GAO is required by law to do work that is requested by a committee of jurisdiction over a matter. The GAO, by policy, for many years, has wanted to operate on a nonpartisan basis, all right? And therefore, as a matter of policy, to the extent that they get a request to do work from a ranking member on a committee of jurisdiction over the matter, they will treat it the same as if it's a chairman of that committee of jurisdiction. And I know for a fact that they've already gotten several requests to do some work with regard to DOGE from a committee of jurisdiction. So they will be doing work. We'll see what they find out, but they will be doing work. Okay.
But even though Trump fired the watchdogs?
No. He fired the inspectors general. The inspectors general are in the executive branch. The GAO is in the legislative branch. Okay. The president has no control over GAO. In fact, the GAO has to be totally independent from the president. All right. The GAO works for the Congress and the American people. The inspector generals are kind of a hybrid, Jatovi. They report to the cabinet secretary or the agency head. All right, solid line, but dotted line they report to the Congress. All right, and so they have dual reporting responsibility: primarily executive, secondary legislative branch, and therefore that's why before the president, dismisses, fires, whatever, an IG, he's supposed to provide 30 days notice to the Congress because they're doing some things for the Congress too, and that was not done.
Okay, something very interesting that has been pointed out is Congress isn't doing anything. But the real question is, David, can Congress do anything? I mean, they're not doing anything, but can they do anything? And if they're going to do anything, what are they going to do? Like Mr. Wonderful used to say on Shark Tank, what are you going to do? So it's a question that I have about Congress. What are they going to do? So can they do anything, David, or are they going to sit there and watch this just play out?
The last time that Congress passed a timely budget and all the appropriations bills before the beginning of the fiscal year was 1996. And they haven't done it for this year either. And they also have a continuing resolution that runs out on March 15th. So they've got to decide what are they going to do about that continuing resolution. And I think there's a chance you could have a full year continuing resolution, okay, which means you have to operate based upon last year's funding levels all year. They haven't decided whether they're going to try to do one budget reconciliation bill or two. One of the things that they're going to try to do through that budget reconciliation bill is extend most, if not all, of the 2017 tax cuts, which you referred to a little bit earlier, Nick, okay, which costs money, doesn't save money, all right? And presumably they could put some, impoundment authority into the budget reconciliation. In other words, give approval for the president to be able to rescind certain funding through the budget reconciliation, because budget reconciliation can't be filibustered. It only requires a simple majority vote, and that's obviously the normal House rule. But in the Senate, you can't filibuster it, and so therefore that's a way to try to be able to get it past the filibuster in the Senate. So I think that's probably what their strategy will be. Their strategy will be to try to get whatever they want to get done through budget reconciliation, or tack it on to a CR, which is a must-pass bill. Let me just say that I think there are several things that need to be revised. We need to change the impoundment rules. They don't work right now. I mean, we're totally out of control with regard to our finances. It ought to be easier to be able to rescind funding in situations that doesn't make sense while still providing a role for the Congress. In addition to that, we also need to think about reorganization authority. The president needs more reorganization authority to be able to reorganize departments and agencies. That's different than canceling programs, okay? I mean, you can have a certain number of programs, but that doesn't mean that they have to be in an independent agency. For example, USAID. USAID used to be part of the State Department. It was a different unit within the State Department. It wasn't a separate freestanding, independent agency with its own appropriation, if you will. I mean, right now, there are too many restrictions on the ability of the president to reorganize government in ways that improve economy efficiency and effectiveness. They can't terminate the programs, but they ought to be able to reorganize how government is done, because we've got way too many departments and agencies already. And we've got way more footprint. I mean, we've got offices all over the country. We've got 13 regions. We've got all these different things that may make sense before the internet, before airplanes, but they don't make sense to now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing is that you're going to be speaking on CBS today, so I don't know exactly what time. The media is finally picking up on this. Do you think DOGE has actually had a positive effect because they finally brought in the financial mismanagement that we've had for years to the media and to the general public? Do you think that has been
I think what DOGE has done several things, okay? Number one, they've highlighted a number of questionable items. And Jatovi's right. a lot of the things that they've highlighted represent policy differences. All right. Waste is in the eye of the beholder. And different people have opinion on what waste is, right? And there is a huge difference between the policy priorities of the last administration and the current administration. So that's a lot of what this is, but that doesn't make it illegal. That doesn't make it fraud. Okay. It does, I would characterize it as, abuse and mismanagement if people are actually doing things that are against an executive order signed by the president. If the president has signed an executive order saying, I don't want to fund any DEI, or I don't want to fund any of this or that, and they're still doing it, then I think that's abuse and mismanagement. Different issue as to whether it's illegal. That's a different issue. Okay. So I think that, as I said, what we need to take steps, but how you do it matters. I've always said that when you're making big changes, that a lot of people are going to oppose what you're doing because they don't want to make the changes. Okay. You don't want to fight a two-front war. And what do I mean by that? Fight a war over what you're doing and fight a war over how you're doing it. Because most people don't win two-front wars, just ask Germany. But the matter is that DOGE is putting itself in a position where it's fighting a two-front war. And my view is the positive thing they've done is to show that there's a lot of mismanagement in government. At the same point in time, the way they're going about it doesn't build bipartisan support. And the way they're going about it serves to further reduce public trust and confidence in government, which is already at or near a record low level.
Yes, Mark Lee, then David, then Toby. You're muted, Mark. You got to press the magic on.
Yeah, we're unmuted now. Hey, I just had a quick question for you. How much do you think that Trump gets in his own way and all along those lines? Because every time I turn around, there's something new that he is doing. I just heard, I think it was yesterday, that he is going to blend his birthday with Flags Day, and there is actually a proposal to actually have the President Trump's birthday as a national holiday, and this is actually something that is out there now. I think it was released earlier today or yesterday. So how much does he get in his own way?
We have too many national holidays already, in my opinion. Okay. Secondly, personally, I don't like the commercialization of the presidency. Right. And I think there's been too much commercialization of the presidency so far. But I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. You're muted too.
Will DOGE ever touch anything Elon Musk was under investigation for? Because he was under numerous investigations, and those inspectors generals were the first ones fired. And there, will, for example, will DOGE touch anything dealing with SpaceX?
Where'd that go?
Anything dealing with Tesla, for example? Tesla is now trying to get the deal where it's $400 million for armored electric cars. Will DOGE touch any of these things?
All right. Well, first, there's a difference between DOGE and Elon Musk. Elon Musk is heading DOGE, okay, but there's lots of other people working on activities with DOGE. The White House has said that Elon will not have anything to do with issues that directly relate to him or his businesses, which presumably means that he would have to recuse himself for anything that the kinds of things that you're talking about. But then the question is, Jatovi, who's going to deal with it? DOGE is supposed to have an administrator who will work with Elon, but who will report to the chief of staff of the president. They don't have that. And I think that is a fatal flaw for DOGE. Not only to deal with conflict issues, but they need somebody who actually understands government, because it's very obvious that they don't. I'm talking about the people, the 20-year-olds that are doing
Oh, yeah, they definitely
I
don't
completely agree
understand
with
that.
that. But I think also because the reason I asked that question, Elon is the head of Doge and supposedly working on all these financial things. He also has these financial ties to the different entities that also have ties to companies that are his competitors. So how do you square the individual controlling and giving suggestions? And he's doing more than just giving the advisory, but actually deciding who gets paid and who doesn't. And it's his companies that aren't overlooked, anything dealing with that. And he supposedly can recuse himself, even though if they do an electric car deal, they'll probably go to Tesla since he is the one who's heading the company and heading Doge. But they won't go to Rivian, who's a competitor of his. So how is that okay?
Well, hold on. Well, first, it's not okay for him to be involved personally in an item where he has a direct or perceived conflict of interest. That is not okay. All right. Secondly, one of the challenges that exist is they're not providing enough transparency with regard to what they're doing, how they're doing it, who's doing it. They're also not providing enough transparency with regard to what kind of background checks have been done on these people, whether they have security clearances, and if so, how they got it, and also conflicts of interest. They're not providing enough transparency on that. That needs to be done. And that's one of the reasons why I say, in addition to providing more transparency, they need to have this administrator, okay? Because the administrator presumably would be somebody who would be focusing on those kinds of issues. And the administrator presumably would be the person who, if Elon had to recuse himself because of a real or perceived conflict of interest, the administrator would be the one that would make the decisions on it. That's how it should work, Jacoby.
Yeah. David, what was brought up before is this particular problem. Are we seeing Silicon Valley hacking and head chopping brought to Washington, D.C.? Because remember, this is not Silicon Valley, but it seems to me we're bringing the Silicon Valley attitude of hacking and head chopping to Washington, D.C., and it's almost like who gives a rat's rear about the legal implications of this. Is this what we're seeing? I'm just curious.
Well, part of the challenges you have is, well, first, let's talk about the private sector. Let's talk about an example. When Elon bought Twitter, he was the majority owner, he was the chairman, and he was the CEO. Twitter was not unionized. And so he could basically do whatever he wanted.
Right.
Okay? I mean, he could do whatever he wanted. Okay. Let's compare that to the federal government. It's got a lot more transparency. It's got a lot more restrictions with regard to what you can and can't do. It's got the highest percentage of unionization of any sector of the economy. It's got general very poor performance management systems that provide a meaningful difference between top performers and people who shouldn't still be employed. Okay. And so as a result, given all these factors, typically what you have to do if you want to end up engaging in quick reductions in force, you have to eliminate offices. You have to eliminate units. You have to eliminate, people who are, who are temporary people and or people who, haven't been subject to, they're probationary people is what I was looking for, probationary people. That you can do quickly, all right? And that you're going to be able to withstand a charge of discrimination because it's not based upon the individual, it's based upon the unit. The problem is government's got no plan, and so what they're trying to do is they're trying to do what they can given the way government works. We need to change how government works because it's not working well, all right? And that's what I'm concerned about. They're doing some things that are short-term gain, but we're not treating the disease. We've got to treat the disease, which means that we have to make fundamental changes. That DOGE, can highlight, but that's not within the scope of their authority. So much more is going to have to be done after DOGE is done.
Yeah. Shaquille Latmer has joined us in from Australia. I don't know how the international community is viewing all this turmoil in Washington, D.C., but maybe he has some opinions on what they're saying down in Australia and down under. Of course, he's in PBS.
Sorry, I'll just got with your laptop. I'm not actually sure if can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Oh, excellent. So as you guys know, I just got back from Fiji and I haven't paid an awful lot of attention to what happens over the weekend. But I think it's pretty alarming to hear some of the figures. Last time I checked, it was something like $2.7 trillion of funds that DOGE is saying was misappropriated from Medicare. So I think that a leaner US government certainly sounds great. I think there would be a concern about whether the US is going to be able to expand on its international relationships if Donald Trump takes it down a very isolationist path. So I think there's a balance that you have to get right, and I just tend to think that Donald Trump might actually push us a little bit too far the other way, and it will have to come back eventually. But at the moment, if there's a question of lowering taxes, lowering regulations, having government which is easier to interact with, I tend to think that the international community would view that quite positively. Certainly, I've had conversations with a lot of people recently who have said, is it now time for us to invest in the United States? Whereas in the past, they were reluctant to do so because they didn't want to come under US regulations.
Well, there's no question this administration wants to cut spending. They want to reduce the size of government, and they want to reduce regulations, and they want to keep taxes as low as possible. All right. I mean, there's no question about that. All right. And of course, some of that relates to DOGE, but most of it doesn't.
I think one of the other issues that, certainly from my perspective, that I would look at is why does the United States generally outperform the European Union or Europe in general? And one of the reasons for that is because European governments tend to be bigger, they tend to tax more and spend more. Now,
and regulate more.
Absolutely. Now, I think that there is a tendency for people generally on the left of centre to say, actually, Americans would like to have some of the things that Europe has. Better access to healthcare, more funding for education, better infrastructure, all of those sorts of things. The cost of doing that, of course, is lower productivity and lower output. Now, I would actually argue that Europeans probably have a nicer life than American workers do because they don't have to worry so much about how they're going to afford all those other things. However, when it comes to business friendliness, the United States generally tends to outperform not just Europe but elsewhere. So that's going to be the push and pull that you'll see. But because of the way the US government actually acts, and state governments and other regulators, because of the way that they act, it does tend to make it a lot more difficult. And I think that that's what Donald Trump is sort of catching on to, is getting the input from the international community, people like myself that'll say, look, I'd love to open up a branch office in the United States, but I don't want to because I'm afraid that the regulations are so complicated and so convoluted, it's easier for me to do it in Canada. Or it's easier for me to do it in Mexico, where I have access to the US from there. And that's what I think he's trying to do, is to try to make the United States more attractive to the international community. And if he gets it right, you'll see a massive influx of investment money coming in. If he gets it wrong, well, you might actually hurt your reputation internationally.
Well, he's hoping he gets it right, and because he's counting on additional economic growth to generate more revenues to try to help close the gap between spending and revenues. But Nick, I think we're about at the hour now.
Yeah, we're about at the hour, and you have your meeting with CBS. We want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, and our audience in the United States and around the world listening to DOGE. She certainly has helped our ratings, so thank you very much. And we'll see you next week on Economics.
Have a great day.
Thank you.